All right. In this section, we're going to talk about the things that determine price elasticity of demand. You may have some idea so far already, since I've mentioned that you can really think about elasticity in terms of consumers' flexibility. So just keep that in mind, right? Elasticity, flexibility, right? So one thing that determines elasticity of demand, price elasticity of demand, is the existence of substitutes. So depending on how many substitutes there are, if there's more substitutes for the good, then consumers can be more flexible, right? So more substitutes means more elastic. If there aren't many substitutes, consumers cannot be as flexible with their demand. So they're going to be more inelastic with their demand if there aren't a lot of substitutes or if there are no substitutes, right? So the existence of substitutes is a major contributing factor to price elasticity of demand. Another thing is share of the budget. So how much of a person's budget does the good take up? Does it take up a large chunk of their budget or a very small portion of their budget? And so, again, thinking about flexibility, people are much more flexible with things that take up huge portions of their budget because it's so much money. Whereas things that take up very, very small fractions of our budget, we're not as flexible or responsive with, right? Think about this. You're looking at buying a car and you're looking at buying a candy bar, and both go on sale for 50% off. Which one is going to make you like more ready to buy the thing, right? 50% off a candy bar is like, okay, what? I'm saving 50 cents or something. Whereas 50% off a car, that could be thousands of dollars, right? So if it takes up a large share of the budget, then people are going to be more flexible with it than if it takes up a very small fraction of the budget. So the car would have a very elastic demand. The candy bar would have a very inelastic demand. Another thing that determines price elasticity of demand is the amount of time allowed for any adjustments to any kind of shock. So the longer that a price change persists, the more able consumers are able to adjust and be flexible, right? So the longer that there's a price change persisting, the greater the elasticity of demand will be. So basically, in the long run, elasticity is greater than in the short run. Excuse me. And relating that back to the slope, right? So recall that in our different classifications of elasticity, right? We looked at the extremes. There was perfectly inelastic, right, which was the horizontal demand curve, and there was perfectly elastic, which was the I'm sorry, did I say horizontal? Perfectly inelastic was the vertical demand curve, and perfectly elastic was the horizontal demand curve. And so basically what we're seeing is that as we go from perfectly inelastic and we get more and more elastic, demand curve gets flatter, right? Demand curve gets flatter. So that's basically what we're seeing here. But now we're thinking about it in terms of the short run and the long run. So in the short run, the demand curve might be D1, and then as we get further into the long run, the demand curve gets flatter because it's getting more elastic. There's more time to be flexible and make adjustments. So how can we define the short run and the long run? We're going to have a different definition for it when we talk about firms, but as far as consumers go and demand goes, the short run is just, it's a time period that's too short for consumers to fully adjust to a price change. Whereas the long run is a sufficiently long period of time for consumers to fully adjust. So long run, full adjustment; short run, not full adjustment. Okay, that's basically what it is. So here's some different elasticities for different industries, and looking at the short run versus the long run. So as you will note, where they are available, the long run elasticities are larger than the short run elasticities. And then also think about these different categories in terms of what we already talked about in terms of substitutes and shares of the budget, right? So air travel, pretty large fraction of the budget for most people compared to things like beef and cheese. So it makes sense that air travel has a higher elasticity of demand than beef and cheese. You can also think of this in terms of necessities versus luxuries, right? So things that are necessities, people can't be flexible with. Things that are luxuries, people can be flexible with. So that's another thing that determines elasticity of demand is necessities and luxuries. Right. So like electricity, for example, very inelastic demand, 0.1 in the short run, at least, compared to fresh tomatoes, right? Lots of substitutes for fresh tomatoes, canned tomatoes, other types of food. So I would encourage you to take a minute, pause the video and look at this and sort of verify, substitutability, fraction of budget, and those sorts of things with regard to elasticity. Okay, and we'll end this section with a behavioral example. So looking at short-term stress and the price elasticity of demand for alcohol. So there were 3 researchers that found evidence supporting the role of short-term personal stress on people who are heavy drinkers of alcohol. Their experiments revealed that inducing a measured amount of additional short-term stress caused the price elasticity of demand for alcohol to decline by more than half, right? So putting people under just a little bit of short-term stress made them really want to buy some alcohol and not respond very much to price changes. So what this means is that exposing heavy drinkers to short-term stress causes their alcohol consumption to become less sensitive to to increases in prices of alcohol. Interesting, right? So another reason elasticity is useful.